Okay, I had no intention of filming any video right now, but I have just gotten home from the department store and I've sprayed on a couple of perfumes on each arm and wanted to quickly do this video so while it's all fresh in my head and on my skin and just give you a bit of a hot take, first impressions. I am not... I really don't want anyone to watch or listen to this and base any decisions or on. I'm not recommending anything. It's just a first impression. So most of you will know that I am a big fan of Guerlain Vetiver and an even bigger fan of Guerlain Habit Rouge Eau de Toilette originals in these particular bottles. Earlier this year, Guerlain released parfum versions of both Habit Rouge and Vetiver. So just to be clear, I have the Eau de Toilette versions of these perfumes. There was also an Eau de Parfum version of Habit Rouge, and there was also a Vetiver Extreme, which I believe was an Eau de Parfum concentration of Vetiver. So now the Guerlain released a few months ago versions in Parfum. I will clarify that they are actually Parfum concentrations, but just take it with a grain of salt. I guess all you really need to understand is that they're a flanker of these originals. Now, when I was in Milan, I didn't even know they existed, and I was in a department store in Milan, and I saw them there, and I only had a cursory smell on a blotter in the store of each of them. And my memories of that particular impression was that the Habit Rouge was fine. I didn't mind it. It did seem to be a heavier composition to the more complex, probably kaleidoscopic composition that is the Eau de Toilette. But I remember being impressed with the Vetiver on the blotter. Now, I was in the department store this afternoon and I saw that Australia, Melbourne, now has parfum versions of these perfumes from Guerlain, these classic perfumes from Guerlain. So I decided to spray the Habit Rouge parfum on this hand and the Vetiver parfum on this hand. And I'm going to give you my impression because they're kind of well into the dry down now, although there wasn't much of a development from top notes into mids into base on my skin at least. And maybe that's kind of probably leaning towards the way a parfum concentration might behave. It's generally speaking, and I'm speaking in very general terms, they're probably a little bit denser. There is usually less carrier alcohol to diffuse it in a way that Eau de Toilette behaves on skin differently to other denser concentrations, and so on my skin, they certainly behave like a parfum. Now, I'll talk about Vetiver first. Now, what I love about Guerlain Vetiver Eau de Toilette is that it's still my reference Vetiver, and I love the actual Vetiver note here. But what I also love about it are the bright citruses in the opening, and I love the spices that come into play in the mid, along with this lovely dry tobacco note that complements the Vetiver in this perfume wonderfully well. What I get with the parfum is that great Vetiver note, but pretty much not much else. It really seems to smother all the subtleties and complexities that the Eau de Toilette has. Is really just here on my skin seems like an not I don't want to say overdose of vetiver. It seems like they've certainly put the vetiver front and center, but if we're talking about a movie scene, it is just eating up the screen and upstaging everything else. And if you like your vetivers to be all about vetiver, I can't see why you wouldn't like how this smells. But to me, it just leaves a little bit lacking in interest for me. It doesn't hold my interest as much. I admire the way this smells as a vetiver material, but it's kind of a little bit boring, and it's certainly not something that I would replace my original vetiver EDT with. So that's really all I have to say about that. And interestingly enough, back a few months ago when I did smell them on the blotter, like I said, the vetiver seemed quite impressive, but now I'm wondering if I was just impressed with the actual vetiver material the way I am with the original one. Now, moving on to the Habit Rouge Parfum. Pretty much the same scenario. Now, what I find interesting about the Habit Rouge Parfum compared to this, again, in the eau de toilette, you always notice, well, first what I will say is when you spray on the parfum, obviously the profile of Habit Rouge is there, like it's recognizable as Habit Rouge in the same way that Habit Rouge Rouge Privé is the one that limited edition that came out last year, but that had some different things going on. It had an iris note. There was more of a suede leather going on in there. With the eau de toilette, I always love that lemon note in there. I always detect the rose. It is a sparkly and warm composition. It's a kind of marvel of a composition. When you think about the way it dries down into this powdery, vanilla heavy amber, and it starts off with those bright, almost lurid lemon notes into the rose. It's just a beautiful perfume that sort of doesn't have anything quite near it. But what they've done with the parfum, and when I smell it on my skin, for starters, all those brighter notes, the lemon is there, like kind of gone in an instant in the opening once it hits the skin, and really we are talking base notes from about the third or fourth minute in terms of development. And honestly, that vanilla from the EDT is gone, and here it feels. Now, I haven't checked the official note list for Habit Rouge Parfum, but it definitely seems to me this amber accord in the base is built more on a material like labdanum, maybe some benzoin, because after I was riding the train and I was periodically sniffing my hand and thinking, once it's dried down, this actually reminds me of a different perfume, and then it just hit me because I realized that it reminded me a lot of Chanel's Le Lion in the dry down. In Habit Rouge's dry down, and I guess I'm not surprised that Guerlain have kind of tweaked this composition a little bit to maybe compete. Presumably, Le Lion has been quite the success for Chanel, and I don't have the statistics in terms of sales or anything, but I do know that Le Lion is one of their most popular Les exclusives from recent years, at least. And I love that perfume. And I think Habit Rouge Parfum really leans into that Le Lion profile. Labdanum, It's kind of probably a little bit more powdery than Le Lion is, but what I would say is if you're a fan of Le Lion, by all means try out Habit Rouge Parfum because one thing I can say about it, not so much the Vetiver, but the Habit Rouge Parfum definitely projects pretty well. So like, I had no trouble smelling it even when my hand was, well away from my face. So they're my impressions of the parfums. What that amounts to for me personally is that I'm more than happy keeping my original Eau de Toilette versions of them. I really enjoy my Habit Rouge Privé because there's a pointed difference in that perfume compared to the Eau de Toilette. But these parfum versions, and I'm not entirely sure how much they cost compared to the original line. I'm presumably they are more expensive. Whether they're as expensive as a bottle of Le Lion, for instance, I don't know. I would be surprised. But that's my take on them on this very limited testing. But I did want to capture my thoughts on camera before I lost these. So I really, the aim of this is just to give you my immediate impressions as I'm smelling them on my skin. But for me, these two are still the benchmark Guerlain masculines for me. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that. I hope you find that useful. Again, I totally encourage to sample, and your experience might be completely different to mine. As always, that's my qualifier. And happy testing, and I'll see you all soon for the next video. Bye.